Hi, I'm Diane McGarry with Dracut Arts. With me today are co-host Tom McGarry,
Right.
March Arts Event author Marek Bennett, and ASL interpreter Shelley. Marek is a New Hampshire-based cartoonist, musician, and educator. He leads discovery-based comics workshops for all ages throughout New England and the world beyond. His comic work includes the graphic novel series The Civil War Diary of Freeman Colby, as well as drawing and translating and editing The Most Costly Journey, which should be coming out this year, right? With the bilingual El Viaje project. His crowd-funded cartoon travel memoirs include Shaha Sketchbook and the Slovakia Fall in the Heart of Europe. Marek is the recipient of the 2021 New Hampshire Governor's Arts Award for Art Education. Marek plays Civil War folk music with a hard tax and hot gonzo primitive folk jive, which I'm going to have to find out about, with the Cold River Ranters. Marek, how did you get started drawing and writing comics?
I don't think there isn't a time, Diane, when I could remember not drawing or writing comics. Um, I have actually I have right here some of my old sketchbooks that I got out of the attic. And when I was 4 or 5 years old, I was drawing in these, and I couldn't read or write yet. So I don't have any writing in these, but I was making stories. I was going page by page and drawing a picture on each page. And I always say I thought I was creating the next Star Wars movie. To me, it was like I was doing that. The story was there on the page. So I guess it's just a way I've always used to channel my imagination um, and connect with people and get ideas down.
So you've always had all these ideas in your head.
Um, no, yes and no. I think a lot of people. I'm an educator, so I do a lot of workshops, and half the time I feel like I want to come in and be like, hey, I have ideas and I've built up these drawing skills and I can share them and teach them. And then half the time I want to come in and be like, hey, folks, I have no ideas today. I don't know what's going to happen. Let's find out, and like those are two kind of opposite approaches. Half the time I want to be like, here's how to draw, here's a drawing technique, here's something I've learned from 40 years of drawing comics. And half the time I want to be like, wow, I don't know, what do you think we should do to solve this? Or, how do you think this should be drawn? Not to dodge the question, but to learn from other people. So sometimes on a good day, I feel like I have a lot of ideas, like I have a lot of imagination, or I see things I want to do and I make big plans. And on a different kind of day, which is sometimes a good day, my mind is a blank and I'm like, what am I doing with my life, staring at this blank piece of paper again? Like, why do I do this every day? And I think both those feelings are really central to what I think makes us artists. Just that being willing to grapple with the blank page and the absolute lack of ideas. That's what keeps you going, as much as having lots of ideas and going down your to-do list and drawing this and that. And so I'm probably going to answer a lot of your questions yes and no. Yes and both.
Does that ever happen? You're an educator, so you teach people, I would guess, usually you have an idea of what you're teaching them, but does that not knowing what you're going to do feeling or almost decision happen when you're teaching people?
Yeah, a lot of my teaching is responsive. That's why I call my programs comics workshop, because I don't go and lecture. I don't go and do like a tutorial. Although I've been doing a little more of that with COVID, doing a lot more video work. That just works a little better. Hey, folks, this is what we're drawing. Here are the steps. Draw along. Because you just don't have the responsiveness you have when you're in person in a classroom so much. Um, so yeah, in the classroom, I really love just having, I especially love coming in and being in that position of like, I've got some things we're going to do, some exercises, but I have no idea what you're all going to do with this. And based on what you do and surprise yourselves and surprise me, we're going to go in different directions with that. And there's certain stuff that always comes up, in terms of readability, or in terms of project management, or in terms of using your tools. Like certain things, there's only so many ways you can use a pencil to make a clear mark on a page that someone else can read. But then, so those come up, so we address them. But then the surprise comes from, those are the craft side. There's a craft to, like, when you want to use a ruler and when you want to be freehand, when you want to use a marker and when you want to use a pen or a brush or splatter toothbrush ink all over. But then what makes it art is like that you take that and combine it in a different way and come up with something that nobody's ever quite done before, but that everybody immediately recognizes as challenging / comforting / readable / not understandable, whatever the effect is you're going for. And I think sometimes having intention and sometimes being responsive to accidents, those are both just as important to the artist. Probably to a crafter too, but it's a little different from like a traditional craft, which is technique focused. This is ideas focused. Cartooning, there's two techniques, there's two big ideas that we're using in my workshops. One is cartooning, which is basically just drawing as simply as possible to get drawing as little as possible to get the biggest impact, right. To get the biggest idea across. And the other is comics, and that's putting multiple pictures side by side so that somebody can look at them in some sequence and get a story that's bigger than the sum of the parts. That's bigger than just that sequence of ideas. So it leads you to understand more than just what is written or drawn on the page. So cartooning and comics, and we're using those two in the workshops. When we combine those, powerful things happen. But I never know quite what's going to happen because we each bring ourselves to it, our humanity, our experience, our voice. So that to me is, I literally don't know what's going to happen every time I walk into the classroom in some ways. And that's really exciting. That's what makes teaching an art too.
Oh,
when
yes.
That's happening.
It definitely is an art. It's interesting. So we've never spoken with a comic maker, writer. What's the difference between comics and graphic novels? Or is there a difference?
Well, comics, the way I just very briefly defined it, like as thinking of it as a deliberate sequence of images. Image being, it could include text, anything visual. So comics as a sequence of images and text. That is a big art form, to me at least. That's something I was doing when I was 4 or 5 years old. I was drawing a picture on a page, turning the page, drawing the next picture, turn the page, draw the next picture. And I filled up sketchbooks with that because it was inherently, it was a medium that I couldn't do any other way. It was more than just drawing a picture.
Right. You were still storytelling.
Right, it's storytelling, yeah. And it's also like, it's more than just saying a story, it's there on the page in front of you. And someone you can watch as somebody else reads it, and something really interesting happened. I was always interested in that. Graphic novels are just a format that, we can use in the publishing industry to package up comics. Comics were not always graphic novels. It's really just in the past century or so that comics have started being published on a large scale in book form. But before that, they were widely available in newspapers. They were available in some magazines. They were available. The Catholic Church is one of the biggest purveyors of comics in world history, I think. Think of all the stained glass windows and murals and woodcuts of terrible martyrdoms of this saint and that saint, right? For better or for worse, there's a whole lot of horror comics out there in every cathedral I've ever been in. I read them as horror comics because of my comics background, but they could also be uplifting spiritual stories of redemption, I suppose. I say that a bit tongue in cheek, I guess. But and if you go all the way back, there's a rich tradition of comics in Japan, in China, in all of Southeast Asia, in India, in the Middle East, ancient Rome was big on monumental imperial propaganda and carved comics, you know. The Mayan Empire was based around a library system of accordion fold books that taught, didn't teach mathematics, but encoded in the mathematics and calendrical systems a way of surviving in the Yucatan 1,000 years ago.
Have you been to all those places?
No, I have not. I have a little experience in Eastern Europe. I have a little experience traveling around the US. We'll splice in a picture here of me looking at a little sticker on a soap dispenser in a restroom showing how to wash your hands, you know, in comics format, or airplane famous, you know, the airplane emergency planning comics that you read at your seat back. But you go all the way back to ancient cave paintings, and there are cartooning techniques and possibly sequential narratives going on. And those are, and I like to point out probably music as well in a lot of cave painting sites because they found instruments there and because of the resonance in the cave. So we're a multimedia species, you know, and we've always, at least for the past 40,000 years, maybe longer, you know, but who are we to say? We have no idea, but maybe longer. Chances are we've just been using multiple modes of creative arts to forge societies, to communicate information, to reinforce power systems, and to make each other smile and laugh and tell stories too.
Well, here's a book that you wrote, three books actually. Freeman Colby's stories, which Tom loved reading. So that was someone's diary that you illustrated?
Yeah, that's been the project. That's been my long-term, slow-moving project over the past, it's been the past decade now.
Wow.
But yes, it's drawn from a diary that I found to me. The local historical society had it in their archives, and I kind of stumbled across it one day back in 2012, I think, and I just thought I'd draw a couple pages. I just thought, oh, this is interesting.
These are not a couple pages. These are very big stories.
If I had said, I think I'll draw a 1,000-page epic, I probably wouldn't have gotten started, you know. But my thought, my innocent thought then was, oh, if I draw a little comics version of the first paragraph, that'll get people so interested, they'll run down to the historical society and they'll make a copy and they'll read the diary themselves. So I kind of tricked myself into this project. And it's interesting you put it there with Nicaragua, because that's the other place I've traveled and done comics teaching and storytelling is Nicaragua in Central America. And the connection there is kind of a long, slow connection. And these things take years to develop sometimes. So I was doing a series, we got a grant from the New Hampshire State Council on the Arts to do a series of workshops in the middle school here in Henniker, my hometown, where I grew up and went to school. And we did a series of workshops for middle schoolers where they drew comics about their lives, their town. There were like comics about going camping, their favorite cookie recipe, and cooking with their family, and just little slice of life comics. And then we made all those comics into little mini comics that we could print out on, you know, a sheet or two of paper, print out a bunch of cheap copies. And then the kids all made up a couple hundred, you know, little mini comics. And we went down to our sister community in Nicaragua, in San Ramon, Nicaragua. And we did the same, not the same series, very different series, but a series of workshops in schools around in the township there out in the countryside. And we told the kids, you know, well, once you draw your comic about, you know, what's life like in your town, which we all want to know back in our sister community in the north, then you can pick one of these comics from the kids in Henniker, and then we'll take your comics back to Henniker and they'll get to read about your town. So it's a slow motion exchange.
Wow, that's very cool.
Comics
Very
exchange.
Cool.
It was really inspiring. And I went down with a couple childhood friends who are also from town here. And we lived in a couple places. So I kept a sketchbook all the time we were down there. And I just, every day I would draw what happened to us. And that became that book, Nicaragua, the comics travel journal. I can't remember the full title of that one, but it's been
Somehow I
12
have a
years.
feeling
now.
you always have a sketchbook with you.
Oh yeah, yep, that's what I'm doing this summer, drawing every day in my sketchbook. It's almost full, so I'll probably need another before the summer's over.
Oh, I was going to say, so the summer's over because your book's done.
No, right.
So
No, then I go on vacation. No, then I have other books here. Yeah, so I just drew every day what happened, and I got back and I thought, well, I'll make a little zine out of this, and it became that graphic novel. And I'm so glad I did, because I would have forgotten all that stuff. I would have forgotten all those conversations, everything that all the little moments that I can capture if I just draw a couple boxes and slowly take piece by piece and build as a comic. I would have totally forgotten those impressions by now, 10 years later, but I can flip through that sketchbook or that graphic novel, and it's like reading somebody else's journal in places. But also some things I remember, oh yeah, I drew that, and the thing I didn't put in there was this, and the memories come back through the artwork. Yeah, I was just doing that this week in the summer sketchbook. We went to the League of New Hampshire Crafts Fair. So I just drew, I took 2 pages, and then as we walked around, anything that caught my eye, I'd draw in there. So they're specific pieces, but they're not drawn like sitting in front of them, staring and drawing, which is, I find kind of journalistic. I find kind of, I get really into the details and I like to do it and I learn a lot. But if I draw from memory, I'm drawing as a cartoonist then. I'm thinking, okay, what's the idea? Well, it was a vase that kind of looked like this. And I don't get caught up in the precise photographic details, which I could have taken a photograph of. But in this case, that's not what the cartoonist is after. As a cartoonist, you're after the impression and the experience. And that's what makes cartooning so powerful. I think it shares something of the experience and the voice of the participant of the journal, if it's a journal.
So I've read your first 2 Freeman Colby books, and I believe you have at least 2 more coming for follow-on years. And I've read bits of diaries and stuff in old style language, and it's kind of interesting for a while, but just the language can be very hard going. But somehow, in combination with your very charming drawings, it was just easy to keep going. And I think the personality of the writer, at least as you present them, it just comes through much more strongly. So thank you for that. It was really fun.
Oh, thank you. That's really nice to hear. That's really exactly why I did it. I mean, on the first level, I wanted to understand the diary. So that's my best way of understanding it, is saying, okay, let's just take this paragraph and let's just draw a slash where we could separate each idea, and then we'll put each idea, in a box on the page. And to me, it's just almost a form of analysis. But beyond just the mechanics of what do these words mean, you're right. You say, what do these words mean grammatically? You're also saying, well, what does this as a story mean? Why is this person telling this story? Maybe I can show some hints of my assumptions about that in the faces of the characters, in the setting, and any details you add in. And it's all my imagination. I hope I'm capturing his personality, but I never met Freeman Colby, and he was dead by the time some of my grandparents were born. He overlapped with one of my grandparents here in town, actually.
Wow.
Could have known him as a kid, maybe, but and another interesting detail we should tell people, or I don't know if you're going to splice in artwork over this after the fact, but the whole book is drawn in stick figure style, right?
Yes.
So and part of my, like we were saying about education there, part of my reasoning with that is I want somebody to look at the page and be focused on the story. I don't know if this is a good example or not.
Yes.
But you can see, they're digging a grave. So yet another grim example. Or a day when nothing's happening. There's a lot of space there. I wanted people to look at the at the page and be focused on the story and be focused on the character, and never be like, oh, that's a cool artistic effect.
Huh.
Oh, he did a lot of shading on those clouds. It's my goal has really been, like I said, for cartooning before, to draw as little as possible. And hopefully the reader would have exactly the reaction you're describing there. And also that, especially young readers, that they would say, oh, I could do that, and therefore be more likely to pick up a pen. It's a balancing act. Like I said, when you're teaching art, like there's a real value to being like, oh, I want to learn to do that. That's a cool technique, effect, idea. But then there's also a real value to being like, oh, I could do that. Give me that pen. Where's the pen? All right, let me try that.
I bet it's a lot harder than it seems to do it well.
It is. People, non-cartooning people, which is to say people who stopped cartooning when they were young, because all kids are cartoonists. Every kid I've ever worked with has been, a pretty natural cartoonist. But people who don't regularly cartoon assume simple means easy. We use that as sort of a shorthand in our lives. Like, keep it simple. Don't make it hard on yourself, And cartooning really teaches you, oh yeah, simple is, if you have to simplify something to get at its core meaning and the heart of the idea, you really have to make some tough decisions here. And whether that's like drawing a person, a specific time and place, an idea, an abstract concept, or whether that's drawing even a 500-page graphic novel. I cut out so much from what I researched for that. I cut out so many repetitive scenes or so many ideas that just didn't fit. And it's still just one person's maybe stitched together, connect the dots kind of story of what life may have been like through my own imagination. So I guess it's a collaboration, but it's not even attempting to be like the encyclopedia of Civil War history, which I used to think would be a fun project to work on. And then I started reading diaries and I realized it's like Whitman says. Walt Whitman wrote in his memoranda, his little notebooks, he wrote, "The true war will never be told," because he had spent years going from hospital to hospital, visiting patient after patient. And he just knew, like, all these stories are epics and they will never all be told. And he would, with his notebook, he would jot down little facts about his patients and little things he needed to remember. And that urge to record story, I think, is what it's what we're all standing on, whether we know it or not, and to become, for me, this is a project of like picking out some of those pebbles that we're standing on and trying to figure out how they fit together. And using all those resources from the time to get a bigger picture of what it may have been like to live then.
Or even to get a picture of what it's like to live now.
Well, that's
really, it's not an easy thing to explain or to give someone.
No, and over the past, so the volume 1 came out in 2016, and then for the next 3 years, I was working on volume 2, and it was like history was every day teaching me that volume 1, where I said, well, I have to stick to the diary of Freeman Colby's story. I have to just stick to his story because I have to respect that. And every day since 2016, I feel like was just teaching me that's not enough. He's not telling the full story.
Yeah.
You have to do. Possibly. You have to dig up other people's voices and fit them in somehow. And that became the project of volume 2. And since I've been working on volume 3, which takes place in 1864, which is just an unbelievable moment of danger for American democracy, with armies outside the gates of Washington, D.C., and much of the country literally in flaming ruins, entire swaths of Virginia, Georgia, Tennessee, whole regions just in flaming ruins, and people, migrants on the move. Like everything that I look at in 1864 is just, it pops up in the news the next day. Like I've been drawing I came across in some of the letters I'm using, came across an account of the first woman to ever speak in the halls of Congress,
Whoa.
which was speak publicly, which was Anna E. Dickinson, the abolitionist. And she was 21 years old, and she was invited to address a joint session of Congress, not an official session, but in the House of Representatives. They built a platform, and the vice president introduced her. It was January 16th, 1864, give or take a day or two, because the dates on the letters are a little confusing. So one of my characters, one of my people I'm drawing from, was there, saw it happen. And as I'm working on things like that, as I'm working on that and pairing that with like an account by another soldier who's saying, there never was a rebellion like this one. This is a rebellion, not of the people against the rulers, but of the rulers being the plantocracy, the slave power plantation owners, the rulers against the people.
Wow.
And that's what makes this rebellion. He's using this charged language. And as I'm working on all this stuff, we have like January 6th going on. We have the Confederate battle flag in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Never happened in the Civil War. And here we are, right?
Yeah.
So that's a good point, Diane. That I think of that every day as I do this. Like 1864, sure, it's 160 years ago or 150 some years ago. But if we don't learn those lessons, they don't go away, and we're still wrestling with them, and they don't get better. They don't fade either.
No, they don't. I don't. Well, I hate to cut this short. It's been wonderful talking with you. Wow, it's just delightful to talk about the value of history, actually, as well as putting people's stories forward. Marek is our March Arts Event author. Register through Eventbrite to join us online Saturday, March 12th at 2 p.m. for his live reading and Q&A. There will be an ASL interpreter throughout the program to sign both his talk and your questions. For more information, check out our website, dracutarts.com, or email us at dracutarts@gmail.com. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Great questions.